Today is May 31st, 2000. We are with Abraham Aroni at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. The interviewer is Ruth Meyer, and this interview will be conducted in English. I'd like to begin by having you state your name, please.
Abraham Aroni.
And was that your name at birth?
No, it was not. It was Abraham Botzman. B-O-T-Z-M-A-N.
And where were you born, Mr. Aroni?
I was born in a peasant village in the Ukraine. The name of the village was Ivankovce.
And when were you born?
I was born July 12th, 1908.
So at this taping, how old are you?
92, or almost 92.
Did you have any other names that you used in your lifetime, or any nicknames?
Not really, only for a while. Oh yes, I worked in the Catskills and the hotels as a busboy once, and they used to call me Mac, because Aroni, so they called macaroni, Mac. So I was known as Mac.
Okay. You also mentioned to me when we had spoken earlier that because of your Hebrew birth date,
Yes.
that you also had a nickname there.
Oh yes, I was born Vav Tammuz, in the month of Tammuz, and the legend is that the summer months of Tammuz and Av, it's July, August, are the months where the insane people really show their insanity. And so sometimes a child that was born in Tammuz was called a Tammuznik if he was a little eccentric. And I was eccentric at times, so they would refer to me as Tammuznik.
You said that you came from a small village in the Ukraine.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about it and what it was like?
The village was a real peasant village. There were only about 45, 50 families. One was a Catholic family and one Jewish family, our Jewish family. As far as we were concerned, although we were Jews, and no secret about it, the peasants in that village were extremely friendly with us. We spoke Ukrainian, we spoke their language, all of us children, my mother, my father, and so on that score we had never had any difficulty. And as a matter of fact, in 1920-21, when the pogroms broke out throughout the Ukraine, and in the villages, Jews were killed by the thousands, in our village, the villagers rescued us when some highwaymen invaded our home, and everybody was home except me and my older sister. And I ran to a neighbor whose name was Tadoch, and he had two sons, and he came immediately and actually killed one of the intruders into our home. And we ran away from the village. The peasants, some of the friends came and said, you run away, we ran away. And some more intruders came later into the village and burned the village on account of us. So practically the entire village. And yet, about 2 or 3 days later, some of the villagers came to see us at my grandfather's and my grandfather's home in a nearby town, Minkovce, and they brought us potatoes and brought us flour. So this goes to show you that not all the Ukrainians were marauders, not all the Ukrainians were Jew killers. I wrote this up for historic archives that the historian Cherry Cover was collecting. He was a professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and in the 1930s he was interested in that project, and I wrote this up because very few of the villages have had anything. I was told later when I looked at in Jerusalem at those archives, our village was the only one where the villagers saved their Jews, to the best of my knowledge. So that's where I was born.
Okay, and I'd like to hear a little bit about your family. First of all, your parents, what were their names and their backgrounds?
My father's name was Aaron, and my mother's name was Rose Lerman, her maiden name. My father came from a nearby town. My mother was born in this Ivankovce, in this little peasant village. But my father came from a nearby town that had a Jewish community. How exactly they met, I don't know, probably through a matchmaker. But my father came and settled in the village and became a resident of the village, of this peasant village, and his livelihood was essentially, at the beginning, he used to estimate the produce of the trees, of the fruit trees, essentially cherries, prune plums, or plum prunes, they're called, and apples. Those were the chief fruits produced in this area. And he would try to estimate the produce when they were in bloom. And brokers from the nearby villages would come down and buy these estimates, and he would make a commission. Now, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work, because it's farming. Depends on rain, sun, so on and so on. So it was very difficult at times. And so he tried something else. Tobacco was beginning to be raised in that area. So he decided to raise tobacco. For that he needed some capital, and he borrowed some from the peasants in this village. They helped him. And for 2 years, I was told, the tobacco crop worked. He was able to sell it. And the third year, it was burned. The summer was very difficult. There was no rain. And he contracted a debt of 50 rubles. No, I think it was 100 rubles. 100 rubles, $50. And couldn't pay it back.
To whom did he owe this money?
He owed it to 2 villagers who were also quite poor, actually. But he felt very bad about it. They didn't press. So he decided that he had to do something about it. And 2 cousins of his from Chicago sent him a Schiffskarte. Schiffskarte was a free passage on a boat. In other words, they paid for the passage. They would come to America. So in 1913, and I remember it was, I was a young boy, of course. I was only 5 years old, but I remember him leaving. And he left about 1913.
What do you remember about the day he left and the preparation?
The day he left is that he just left and said, "Don't worry, I'll keep in touch, and I hope to be there not a long time and come back." And that's what I remember. And I also remember that I felt fear of his leaving, and I remember looking for a siddur, looking for a prayer book, to see whether it has some prayers for people in transit, traveling. And I remember I came across some little prayer, and I read the prayer to myself, and I told Mama that I was reading the prayer. She was very happy, and that was it.
Was it an unusual occurrence for the head of the household to leave the village to go to America?
Oh yes, oh yes. It already began. That people in the various towns where there were Jewish communities, quite a number of people were leaving for America. Never called it the United States, America. America, of course, I remember one family went to Chile, but it was still America, which of course it was. So it's strange. Yes, it was America, not the United States. Anyway, he left, and at the beginning it was very good. In 1913, we started getting money from him a little bit. But then in 1914, the war broke out, and there was absolutely no mail for 4 years. He didn't know whether we were alive. We weren't sure whether he was still alive, because we were in the war zone. So those 4 years were horrible. Between 1914 and 1919. In 1919, after the revolution broke out in 1917, the Soviet Revolution. And I remember in 1919 we finally got one card, so at least we were sure that he was alive. But again, our mail from us wasn't reinstituted yet because of the revolution turmoil. So that continued, and we suffered. I still don't know, because we were 7 children, my mother, only that we had our own vegetables, and of course the peasants, some had cows. We had our own chickens, so chicken was no problem. We had eggs, and in the summer we'd grow we had a garden, and my sisters, I had 3 older sisters.
Why did you name them for me?
The oldest was Etje, which in the United States became Jette. The next one was Malka, and the next one was Chaya, who became Ida when she came to the United States. And then my brother was younger than I, but even he would help.
Okay, and what was his name?
His name was Yehoshua, Joshua, and my youngest brother was really a baby. He was born after my father left. He was born in December 1913. His name was Raphael. So it was very, very, very hard. Most of the time we were actually starving. We managed to get bread, milk. Because there were cows. It was a dairy. The peasants were very kind that way. They would keep us supplied with those things. But when the pogroms broke out, and when this incident happened, when these marauders came and invaded our home, we left this village, and we remained with my grandfather in Minkovce, with my grandfather and grandmother. So my oldest sister, who was at that time probably 18 or something like that, just 18 I think, decided to try to go to Romania. That was the closest borderline from where we lived. Of course, it was an illegal crossing because no passports were given. There was no government during the revolutionary period. So it was impossible. So you had to do it clandestinely, secretly, and dangerously. Nevertheless, she managed, an 18-year-old girl, managed to get to Romania. Now, by that time, there were some Jewish organizations all over the world who tried to help these refugees from revolutionary Russia. Fortunately, there was one in Romania too. So when she came there, they got in touch. Also the Hayas, which was an American organization, the Hebrew Immigration Sheltering Society, I think is the full name. I'm not sure. It's still in existence. It's a wonderful organization. They were helpful. So she got in touch with my father because the mail existed, and he immediately sent her money. Immediately. Again, she came back to Ukraine, to us, and said the only way to save ourselves is to cross in clandestinely, secretly, dangerously, to Romania, and when we get to Romania, we have re-established our correspondence with Father. Father will send us money, and little by little, we'll get a visa to the United States. And that's what happened. The entire family, in the midst of the winter, because that was the easier way when the Dniester, the river Dniester, leading from the Ukraine to Bessarabia, which was part of Romania, would be frozen. And so it's possible to cross more easily at night. And I remember, I'll never forget, that little Raphael, who was still a child, almost fell into a crevasse, and we just managed to save him. But we managed to cross the border and came to Romania and managed to get to the capital city, to Bucharest, where I remember we lived in a big room where there were cots, and the name of the landlord was Schechter, I remember. And I also remember that the services, the toilet was all the way downstairs in the courtyard somewhere, and we had to go from the 6th floor down to attend to. And there was a public bath not too far from there, and we would go for a bath once in a while. And we were there for almost a year, because already in 1922, this was the beginning, in 1921, the Johnson Acts were, anti-immigration acts were passed. So it was very difficult to get a visa, because my father had not been a citizen yet. Later he became a citizen. In 1924 he became a citizen. But he had taken out the first papers, they used to be called. The application for citizenship used to be referred to as first papers. And then when you got the citizenship papers, they were the second papers. I don't know whether that nomenclature still exists. But that's a history of Jewish life in the United States. An immigrant's life, not only Jewish life.
Before we go too far ahead...
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I do want to backtrack just a little bit, because I do want to hear a little bit more about Jewish life for you in the Ukraine. If you have memories of it, do you remember any Jewish rituals or religious observance in your home as a youngster?
Of course I do, of course. We had a Jewish home. I remember the Seder on Pesach, there's no doubt about it. I remember every Shabbos, I remember. My mother never failed to light the candles, never failed to light the candles. My father never failed to sing Shalom Aleichem, which is the introduction to the Sabbath, greeting the Sabbath queen. And I never remember, I always remember sitting down at the table on Friday night with family, large, no matter what we had, a little bit, but we ate, and the whole family ate together. Even if we had no dishes, we say not enough cutlery. I remember we didn't have enough cutlery, but we managed somehow. Oh, definitely. And all the holidays we celebrated. There was no synagogue, but we used to celebrate it on our own. My father had a siddur, and he would pray by himself. And I was introduced to the prayers. And my brother was introduced to the prayers, Joshua, when he was a little older, and so on.
Did you ever venture into another town or community, or did a rabbi come around?
No rabbi, never. But for the high holidays, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, these nearby villages, not the towns, not the Städtlach. The Städtlach had Jewish communities and they had synagogues. But these little towns, these little villages, like Ivankovce, there was another one, Archishna, which was a little bigger than we. Not 50 families, there were 125 families, and one Jewish family. Now, I remember that on the high holidays, a number of these villages used to get together and go to this bigger village, Archishna, which was, I would say, I can't remember, but I'd say 6 fjords. 6 fjords would be about 4 miles. And I remember going there as a child, or being taken for the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, for both those holidays, and then walk back. We'd go for the day and walk back. Go for the day and walk back. That's the way these little villages continued their Jewish rituals. But no, there were no visiting rabbis at all. Not to the best of my memory, certainly not to the best of my own memory, and not to the best of my knowledge from reading. And I read a lot about this in Yiddish and in Hebrew and in Russian. No, that didn't. There was no such thing as visiting rabbis. There was in the towns. There would be visiting preachers. Rabbis are not rabbis, but people who were. They were called darshanim. They were not called the rabbanim. They were called the darshanim. Darash means to preach. Now, some of them were these Helen brimstone preachers. That existed. I never experienced it myself because we didn't live in a town. But I know it existed. And when we lived in Minkovce, the 2 years waiting until we were able to cross the border, the boys used to tell me that the darshan came to the synagogue the year before, something like that. But the Jewish rituals existed in their homes because this is the only thing we knew and the only way we knew how to live. Because you couldn't mix, now for example with my education. How did my education start? No, in Ivankovce, there was a church school. There was a Pravoslavnia church, a Jewish, a Christian Orthodox church, Eastern Orthodox, I think they're called, church, and there was a Cerkovnaya Shkola, a church school. Now, my oldest sister, Yera, went to the Cerkovnaya Shkola, and she learned how to read Russian, even Slavic, and it was fine. But when I grew up, when time for me to go to school, no Jewish father could possibly think of sending a son to a church school. And at that time, there was still a second family. When I turned to be, I was 3.5 years old. So Zisha, the other man, his name was Holtzman. And by the way, anyway, he got together with Zisha and went to town.
Was this another man who moved into?
Who lived in this Ivankovce, and he had a little general store. But later on, he couldn't make a living, so he moved out. So we remained alone. But at that time, when I was 3.5 years old, 4 years, almost 4, this Jew family. So my father went to town and brought a teacher who would stay with us and teach me, the oldest son, Hebrew, to make him a Jew. And this man came, my father brought him, and introduced me to him. This will merely tell you the kind of child I was, and the kind of person my father and my mother, my kind of people they were. And I didn't like it. It didn't appeal to me. I just couldn't. So I came to my mother. I said, Mama. And I used a certain Yiddish expression that's not usually used. Mein Herz schockelt sich mir, which wasn't good Yiddish. In Yiddish we say, mein Herz klappt mir, beats strong. So my mother said, was ist? I said, gefällt mir nicht, ich will nicht. So my mother went to my father.
Could you just translate what you said for the benefit of the kids?
So my, yes, I said, my mother said, how come? What's the trouble? I said, I don't like him. I don't think I'll be able to learn anything with him. So she went to my father, and told my father. So my father said, all right. He took him back. And it took him again some time, and he went to another town, to Minkovce, this other town where my grandfather lived. And he brought back a young man, must have been about 18 or 19, whose name I'll never forget, Zalman Zegitsman. He later became quite an important man in the Communist Party. He was a young man, and he taught me something which I'll never forget. I'm thankful to this very day, and to me it's still magic. I consider it magic. And that's why I became a teacher of French. That's why I became a teacher of Hebrew. He taught me how to read Hebrew. All right, that's it. Taught me how to read. But then, all right, I learned Abba, Ga, Ma, Da. But I asked him, wait a minute. It makes no sense. Ah, he said, look, I take here the and I put it together with this here. How does this sound? And he showed me a V. I said, it sounds V. He said, you see that? Now, I put the in front of it and the V next to it. And lo and behold, it means father. I said, yes, it really does. He said, yes. Look. I take a ch and I put, he says, what's this? And he points to a D. I say, D. He said, yes. And then he takes a re, a reish. I say, re. He said, look, if I put these ch, D, re together, it means a room. I say, really? I said, it's magic. He said, yes, it's magic. And to me, absolutely, language became something magical. I couldn't conceive it until I began to combine things to make sense of it. It appealed to me so much, and that left an impression that I'll never, because this is what language is. And it's still, to me, it is still magical. And that's why I love to read poetry, because it's magical. And that's why I carried a Bible with me, not because I'm not religious, I'm not observant, because reading the Bible is beautiful, in Hebrew particularly. And I love the Bible in other languages too, because it's great poetry. And that was the basis of my education. I had no formal education otherwise than that year and a half with him. And then I came to the United States at the age of 14 and a half.
Okay. Your father left, and you were in the Ukraine, and there was a revolution. Did you have a bar mitzvah? Was there
any? My grandfather taught me how to put the tefillin on. My grandfather still lived in this village at that time. He taught me how to put the tefillin on, and I learned the prayers, and he said, all right, we'll go to town either on Monday or Thursday, when there is public service, when the synagogue is open for public service, and we'll go in, and you'll put the tefillin on, and that makes you bar mitzvah. That's the way I became bar mitzvah. That was my introduction, official introduction to Jewish life as an adult. That's what happened.
So now we can go forward again. Were you aware of the revolution in Russia
Oh,
at that
yes.
age? How was your life affected?
Oh, it was awful. It was terrible, because we never knew who is in charge. There was no, at least when the Tsarist regime was there, we knew what to expect. We knew there was the police. Of course, and our village was a farming village, so the police had nothing to do there. We didn't know. Only when the war started, they started using the village partly for the rear guard, and so some fields were taken over. And I remember a lot of Asian soldiers, whom we had never seen before. We called them Mongolians because the Mongol, the different facial stature. But they were Asian people, and they were housed in these open fields. But they didn't stay long. I remember must have been a month, maybe 2 months, and then they disappeared. But then when the revolution broke out, there was absolutely no, so you didn't know whom you want, and you were always afraid. You were afraid that this group would come in, the White Russians would come in, the Red Russians come in, the Ukrainian nationalists would come in. There was a very famous group, Denikin, who was the White Russians, but extremists, Tsarists. So it was, oh yes, we felt it even as children, definitely, because it was frightful. It was frightening for the entire community. We never knew, and they'll come. They'll use the fruit. We lived from the fruit and the apples. That was the produce. Without that, the village couldn't live, and they were afraid all the time. Oh yes, definitely. It was fearful.
So you made your way then safely, more or less, to Romania.
We made it, yes.
And you...
We were there for about a year, I remember, in Bucharest. And then finally, the visas came through for the children under a certain age. And my two oldest sisters, Yetta and Malka, had to remain. We arrived in January 28, 1922, we arrived in the United States, but my two oldest sisters had to remain until May, and they came after us in May. I forget which date they came, because they were too old to be included on this passport. It was a special Nansen passport. Now, you don't know who Nansen was. Nansen was a famous Norwegian explorer who became very much interested in the post-war, the post-1914-18 war, turmoil, revolution, what to do with all the refugees. Most of us were documentless. We had no documents. We had to run away. We had no birth certificates. We had no passports. We had nothing. So he came to I think the United Nations were already in existence, that's right, and said we must do something. So they devised a special passport called the Nansen passport. And you had to apply for it, so we had no passport. Without a passport, how will the United States help us? Now, on the passport, there was a group picture of the family, if it was a family, but only up to a certain age. After that, they had to have individual passports. So my two oldest sisters had to have individual passports.
Were they married yet?
No. They were. One was 20, the other one was 18 or something like that. They were not. No, it was 1922. So they came 5 months later. And then my father had.
How did you come?
By boat. I remember the name of the boat, but I forget the name of the boat where my sisters came. I must say
but
that.
your boat?
My boat was Zealand. Zealand, it was a boat of the Red Star shipping company. There was a White Star and a Red Star. This was a Red Star shipping. The name was Zealand. It was a small boat. We came from Antwerp directly to New York. It took about 2 weeks, I think it was, approximately. I can't recall exactly, but I know the date. I know that because I checked it with the records, and I know that anyway. And my father had prepared a 4-room apartment. On the 4th floor, was it 4 rooms? No, 3-room apartment. A kitchen, a dining room, living room, no, and 2 bedrooms. 2 bedrooms. On the 4th floor, on East 12th Street, right off Avenue B, 603 East 12th Street.
In Manhattan?
I beg your pardon?
In Manhattan.
In Manhattan. It was all furnished. You had dishes prepared, cutlery better than we had in the Ukraine, a burning coal stove, no, running water in the kitchen, no cold, nice, just cold running water. The toilet, there were 2 toilets on the floor, one at the back and one at the front for the front apartment, but on the same floor. And that's where we lived for a number of years.
Do you remember the reunion you had in
Oh yes, oh yes, I remember the reunion. I also remember my first Sunday at 603 East, which is interesting. I think important. Excuse me.
Yes.
The boat, the Zealand, unfortunately, arrived at the 3:45 on a Friday afternoon. At 4 o'clock, after 4 o'clock, no Ellis Island visits, nothing. So my father, although expecting the boat, he knew, couldn't come on. The only ever time that my father traveled on the Sabbath was that Sabbath. So he had to come Saturday to claim us and to take us home. And he came Saturday. He came Saturday on the ferry to Ellis Island. We were waiting for him because they knew. We told him that the father was coming. I didn't recognize him, but my mother recognized him. Ran, embraced us all. Raphael he never saw. He knew he had a child, but never saw. So he realized that was Raphael. You, Raphael. Began to kiss. We all began to cry. I remember I was crying. I think everyone was crying. He was very hurt that Malka and Yeda were not there. But he knew that what happened. So, now, how do you go from Ellis Island to East 12th Street? Shabbos. And my father, I don't know how much he was making at that time, but I assure you, he had no money. He had a little bit. We took the ferry, then we took the First Avenue elevated train. Hasn't existed in years, but there was a First Avenue elevated train. And the station was on 14th Street, and we got off at 14th Street. And it was a lot of snow, very snowy, very cold. And we walked from 14th Street to 12th Street to come to our new apartment. But that was the only time my father drove. All right, we settled the apartment. It was Shabbos, so we couldn't cook, so we had, but they had prepared. There was a certain neighbor, he was a boarder down on 12th Street at a certain Mrs. Mittelman. I know the Mrs. Mittelman. She had no husband, Mrs. Mittelman. So Mrs. Mittelman prepared for us something to eat when we'd come back. So we had something to eat, went to sleep. Sunday morning, it snowed all night practically. I go downstairs to see where I am. And they cleared a little bit of the snow, and I see two policemen standing in the street, and boys, oh, I don't know, a lot of them, 5, 6 boys, my age, younger than me. And the policemen are laughing, and the boys are laughing, and they're playing, they're throwing snowballs at each other. It's a good time. I stood there open-eyed. I couldn't conceive it. I couldn't understand it. Imagine children, boys not being afraid, and the cops standing there laughing and playing. That was my introduction to the United States. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It's a completely different type of life, a different type of what shall I say, relationship between one human being and another human being. It was something very, very hard for me to understand. The only similar thing that must, I know it's not, but it's part of American history. In 1933, when Roosevelt became president, I was working in Albany, New York. I became very friendly with the professor of psychology. There was a college, it was a teacher's college there. I became very friendly with him. He's a very nice man. His name was Alan. And he knew what I was doing. I was teaching in a Hebrew school in Albany. And he said to me, look, I don't think you're very happy there. I have very good friends in Chicago, in Washington. And they were outstanding men. They were in his in Roosevelt's kitchen cabinet, Ezekiel and Bean. Maybe no, you don't remember, but they were very well known. I'll send you to them with a letter. I'll write to them. Maybe they can find you some job. So I had never been to Washington. I said, sure, I'll take a few days off, go to Washington. I had some money. I was working. I come to Washington. The first time I'm in Washington, I want to look around. So I look around. I didn't get a job. That's beside the point. But I looked around. And when I look around, I see State Department. So I walk into the State Department. I walked from floor to floor without anybody stopping me, asking me what I want, who I am. This was in 1933, until I finally come to an office, a huge office. And I see Hull. He was the Secretary of State, Hull. I open the door, and I walk, I don't know, half a block. Finally, at the desk, they said, sir, can I help you? I said, no, I'm just looking around. That was what the United States was like in 1933, a different country. We didn't see a soldier anywhere. We had a standing army of 700 people at that time. We had no standing army. A different life.
Okay, so if we can
I'm sorry.
reel you back in here.
I'm sorry, I lived too long, so.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, you're now here in the United States.
Yes.
As a youngster.
And my
It's Sunday.
And my father.
First day.
That's all. So that was my impression. So I can come back and I tell my father and says, yeah, that's the way it is. No, it's very nice. Don't worry about it. It's good. I say, it's wonderful. Fine. But now he says, now let's see, what do you want to do? So I told him I want to continue with my Hebrew studies. So he says, all right. At that time, there was only one all-day school. So he took me to the school on Henry Street. And although I wasn't used to this religiosity, it was a little too, because we were a very Jewish home, but not strict at all. And here they would see whether the boys wore tzitzis, for example. This was something that was very foreign to me. But it was all right. I didn't mind it. And he enrolled me in that school, and I was quite happy there.
What was the name of the school?
The school was Rabbi Jacob Joseph on Henry Street. It's an all-day, it was an all-day, all-day Jewish school. From 8:30 to 3 o'clock, we had Jewish studies with a break for lunch, and between 3 and 7, with a slight recess for about a half hour, English studies. So that's where I was for about a year. But then there was another Hebrew school not far from there, which was a completely different type of Hebrew school. The name of that school was Herzliya, named after Herzl. That was a secular school, meeting only in the evening, mostly for adults and older teenagers, who wanted to learn modern Hebrew, spoken Hebrew, secular Hebrew. One of my colleagues at the yeshiva of the Joseph Jacob School, it's easier for me in Hebrew, Yaakov Yosef, said to me, "Oh, I saw him reading a Hebrew newspaper." I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, I go to no school. After I finish here at 7, I go to Herzliya. It's only 2 blocks away on Ludlow Street." So yeah. And he told me what he learned. So I came home the following day and told my father that I also want to go to this school. So my father said, "How much will it cost?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Ask." So I asked, and it was a pittance, very, very little. I said, "It's all right, go, bye-bye." So I started going there. So I'd leave the house about 8 o'clock in the morning, walk from 12th Street to Henry Street. I had the nickel for the coffee, but I saved the nickel for something else. And then, right after 7 o'clock, I'd walk to Ludlow Street and come home at 11 o'clock, something like that. But there I learned secular Hebrew. I learned modern literature. And I was graduated from there in 1924. But I also left Jacob Joseph to go to a higher yeshiva, which was called Rabbi Isaac Elchanan, which later became Yeshiva University. Why did I leave this school? Because I was a little older than all the other boys, and I met in Herzliya, I met a fellow, a young man, who was a student, a Talmud student, a real rabbinic student at Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. So he said to me, "Look, come with me, you'll be with older boys, and it's a higher learning school. You have the brain." I said, "All right, I'll go." And I was interested. I really wanted to study Talmud, because the Talmud, I never studied Talmud. And the teacher I had in Yaakov Yosef was a very fine teacher, and I learned quite a bit of Talmud. I was very much interested, and I wanted to continue. But I came there. It was the most disorganized place I have ever seen in my life at that time. I'm not passing judgment now. Nevertheless, I stayed. I tried one class, I tried another class. I stayed for about, I don't know, 6, 7 months, and I said, "It's no good. I'm not learning anything, there's no point." So I began to look for a job. In 1924, this American Jewish history. In 1924, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, of all places, decided to have a community Hebrew school. Generally speaking, the Hebrew schools in the afternoon were attached to synagogues. This town had 2 Orthodox synagogues, 1 Reform synagogue, and a brand new conservative synagogue that just opened. And somehow these 3, 4 came together and said, all right, no congregational schools. Let's open a community school. See what happens. You need teachers. Where did you get teachers in 1924? 1924, there were very, very few. Anyway, they came to Herzliya to look for teachers. So the principal, Einstein, said to them, I have a very fine young man. He has no experience. He's a young man. I think he'll be too good for you. I don't want to go into details. I was hired. I began to teach in 1924 Hebrew at Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I was there for 1924. I was there for only for 1 year. 1 year. Why did I leave? The principal was a complete idiot. It was impossible to work with him. So I said, it's not for me. I must say that this is very selfish, but it's true. Honestly, with the day I left, when I came to see it, the children were crying. They were weeping. They came. Parents came to beg me to stay. It so happened that I have a gift for teaching. And I happen to be a very, very good teacher. So I left. I got a job in Lynn, Massachusetts. I was there for 2 years. I was there for 2 years. I would have stayed later, would have stayed longer. I liked it very much. The man who was principal was a wonderful, wonderful human being, a scholar, an extraordinary human being. His son, Ezra, who was a student of mine too, I taught him Job, the book of Job, became a very known, what do you call it, radiologist in New Jersey. His name was Schlossberg, Ezra Schlossberg. And I was there for 2 years. Now I came back. Why did I come back to New York? One of my teachers in Herzliya, who later became the chairman of the Hebrew Literature Department at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, whose name was Simon Halkin, Shimon Halkin, an extraordinary human being, a great poet, great poet. By the way, translated The Leaves of Grass to Hebrew. A marvelous translation, a beautiful translation. But he himself was a great poet, a novelist. He was a mentor of mine. I loved him till the end of his day. He died at the age of 90, a few years ago. Used to see him all the time. He started bombarding me with letters. You cannot get anywhere to the United States without a formal education. You must have a formal education. You come back, go to college, get a formal education. I came back because of him. Got a formal education in NYU, not at City College, because City College refused to accept me. Why did they refuse to accept me? Because I came in only with the college entrance board exams. I passed all the exams that were necessary except geometry. I couldn't get geometry. The others I learned by myself, I managed. So I had a lot of credits. But at City College, they refused to accept me because I had no geometry. Simon Halkin knew the dean. He got his master's at NYU. He wrote an essay on hedonism and won the first prize, which of course I knew at Simon. He didn't have to write it to me. If I had told me, they would say, don't have it because nobody else will win it. He'll win it. So of course he won it. So he was a persona grata. Everybody knew. So Simon said, you come with me. I came. And they accepted me because Simon told me to accept. So I got my bachelor's from NYU. But later I went to City College to get my master's because it was cheaper. I didn't have to.
So when did you finish your formal education?
I got my bachelor's in 1930, and I think in 1932 I got my master's. 2 years. I think it was 2 years.
And then did you continue in a teaching career?
And then I was teaching in Hebrew schools, in various Hebrew schools. I became a teacher in Herzliya. I became a teacher and then they started giving exams. For many years, the Board of Education didn't give exams. Finally, they started giving language exams. So I took the French exam, took the Hebrew exam. So I passed the French exam for junior high school, and there was no Hebrew for junior high school. So I took the Hebrew for high school. I prefer high school. So of course I was first on the list. Believe it or not, but I was first on the list of the Hebrew exam, and I got a job as a substitute immediately in 1936. I began to teach Hebrew at Thomas Jefferson High School, and I was there for 18 years.
Okay, so now we're around 1936. Hitler has come to power in Germany. You're a thinker.
I was
and very
teaching. I was
Jewish.
teaching.
In your outlook, what was your feeling about the rise of Hitler in Germany? Was that related
Oh
to your
yes.
life?
Oh yes. Well, how it wasn't related. One of the first things that I did in Jefferson, I was teaching in Jefferson at that time. I began to round up teachers. So
No, continue.
I began to round up teachers, Jews and non-Jews, to give me applications for immigrants from Germany, Austria. And some did and some didn't. Some Jews didn't. And I'll never forget, the first one I approached, a non-Jew. He was the chairman of the language department. And I loved him. He was a wonderful man. Reynolds, a good Scotsman. He was a wonderful human being with beautiful blue eyes. I said, Lou, here's an application. This is what it is for. I know it's a burden. Please.
You wanted an affidavit?
That's right, an affidavit.
Mm-hmm.
He said, here. And he went to others. And some he convinced, some he didn't. One of the first, what shall I say, important things, I mean that was a life-saving business. It wasn't easy, but some did and some didn't. So of course I was aware. I couldn't sleep nights, believe me, at times. And that is why I think I could have pleaded all sorts of things not to be in the army. I couldn't do it.
Well, but this was earlier on that you started with the trying to get affidavits.
Affidavits, yes.
Yeah. And for whom? Were they for people that you knew that you were trying to get it? Or was there a campaign just
No.
sponsor anyone who was looking for a visa?
No. For anyone. No, we didn't know for whom. No. This was just if they need one, we'd have one. That was the idea.
Mm-hmm. And when did you start this?
It must have been in 1940, 41.
In the 40s.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go back.
Yes, it was in 41.
I see.
In 41.
I see. Okay. So.
In 41. I know it was because we broke the war.
But back in the 30s, earlier on,
Yeah.
as Hitler started to come to power, and even on Kristallnacht, did you know, or did you have a premonition or a sense of what was to happen?
I did. I personally did. I said it will never become better. It'll be worse and worse, worse and worse, because I read parts of Mein Kampf. I read parts of Mein Kampf, and I saw that it's It's coming. He'll do what he's saying. And my God, and the reports from Germany, the correspondent from Germany, I forget his name, wrote about the things very openly. The American the correspondents who were in Germany, Shearer was very open about it. He said, this will continue, this will get worse and worse and worse. And I believed him. I personally did. And I think many of my colleagues did. Definitely.
Were you married at that point?
Oh, yes. I married in 1936.
Okay. And what is your wife's name?
Same thing.
What her name? Her name.
Her name is Celia.
Celia. And how did you two meet?
We met in Herzliya. She was a student in Herzliya, and I was a student in Herzliya.
Okay, so you married in 1930.
And her sister was a student in Herzliya, her older sister. That's how I met. That's how we met.
So
So I knew her since 1923. We've known each other since 1923, and in 1936 we got married.
where were you in September of '39 when war broke out?
Oh, I was in the Catskills. Not as a worker. No more. I worked only 3 summers as a busboy, and then I became the manager of the whole shebang. We were vacationing in a very beautiful little village called Cotterskill, in the northwestern part near Windham, New York. Very beautiful country, very beautiful. And there was a little farm, Cotterskill, and and her name was, oh, what was her name? Her first name. Anyway, she was a wonderful cook, and she took in some boarders. She had quite an establishment. So we were there, just the two of us, beautiful. And I get the Times, and I see this. I began to scream. That's where I was.
What was your instinct? What to do?
My instinct was that the United States will not be able to stay out of it. It would be impossible, because this is a conflagration that will spread. In a conflagration, you can't stop. That was my immediate. I told it to Celia. I think Celia will corroborate. She'll probably remember that was one of my first things. She said, no, look, the United States, after all, there are lots of isolationists, it won't be so easy. I said, yes, but we're drawn in. We were drawn in 1940. I wasn't here, I was a child, but the United States was drawn in. All right, there was a Lusitania, so there'll be something else, not Lusitania. Be drawn in. So, no, I was quite open-eyed about it. Not that I could do anything about it. I couldn't. I had never been to Germany. I had no German friends. I had friends in France. I used to, with France, yes. I immediately got in church with a certain man whom I knew very well, Spector, and asked him, maybe you want to come to the United States, maybe we'll try it. No. He'll manage. Fine, so he didn't go. But in Germany, I really never had any contacts with Germany. I had never been to Germany.
As the war progressed, you said that you tried to get people to sponsor affidavits.
Yes, sponsor
et cetera.
affidavits.
Did you know what was going on? Did you know what was going on in Nazi Europe? Had you heard about the Nazi policy toward Jews?
Of course. You have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to know it. If you read the newspapers, if you read the Tribune and the Times, that was enough. And at that time, by the way, there was another one, PM. It was an afternoon newspaper that had very good coverage of that. A fellow named Ingersoll, some madman, subsidized that newspaper.
And did you know anything about the concentration camps? Were you aware of that?
I certainly was. I didn't know how bad they were and where they were. Dachau, you knew immediately, because the Dachau, that was published everywhere, because the Dachau originally was only for Germans and so on. So if they have it for Germans, they'll have it certainly for Jews and gypsies or whatever it is. And homosexuals, by the way. The homosexuals were one of the first ones. And you had to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to realize it. I honestly...
Did you have any contact with immigrants who came in the mid to late 30s from Germany or other parts of Europe who were escaping?
Only through students. We began to get some students at Thomas Jefferson High School who were the children of immigrants.
Where was Thomas Jefferson High School located?
Thomas Jefferson High School, it's still there, but it's shambles. It was in East New York, Bronxville. 90% Jewish, 85% Jewish. It was a wonderful school. Really, it's a school that should be written about. And it was, and it should be written about, because it was an extraordinary school with a faculty that was out of this world. College faculty, university faculty, marvelous. With a student body, outstanding student body. Let me tell you about one or two of these. One just called me the other day. Her name was Giselle. Chana, her Hebrew name is Chana. She gave up Giselle, or Gisela. Kleinerman. Came a little girl, I know she was 13, 14, 13. One of the brightest people I ever seen. Didn't know a word of English, hardly knew a word of English. We had a special class, special organist class. I was in charge of this group to teach these we started getting a lot of these kids in. So we had special classes for them, to teach them English. In a hurry, in a few weeks. Anyway, she took to it like water. She graduated, she was valedictorian. We ran away with all the prizes. Later met a renowned physicist who had a fight with the Soviet Union and won in the court in Hague. I can tell you stories that keep you day and night. Now, I remember a young man whose name, I forgot. As a matter of fact, he later on won the prize of the best teacher in the United States. And he wrote up that, mentioning me, that it was thanks to me at Thomas Jefferson High School, who introduced him to the beauties of teaching and the importance of teaching, and introduced him to language and all that sort of thing. So we had these kids, but I had no direct contact. With Hannah's parents, I did have some contact. With another one, also a certain Leah Atik, I had contact, who's a poetess and lives in Paris now. I had a contact with her parents because they were terribly afraid, which finally happened to some extent, that she would marry out of faith or marry not a practicing Jew. And the father, I remember, came to me begging me, said, I know how close Leah is to you. Please don't let her marry Karkafta de lo Manachkina, a head that doesn't put tefillin on. That's an expression, a Talmudic expression. I say, Mr. Atik, what can I do? She's a wonderful girl, you know her. I can't, you can't do very much, I can't. I don't think that'll happen. But otherwise, I had this, she, as I said now, she's a poet, and she married a great painter, a wonderful painter, a Jew. But it's true, it doesn't put any tefillin on. But she married a Jew, and they have 2 daughters, and they're Jewish. I didn't have, but no direct contact. No.
Okay.
But I was aware of these things. As I say, I can't understand because the Tribune, I used to read the Tribune and the Times. That was enough for me. And it was full of these things all the time. Our correspondents, our German correspondents were damn good.
Was there a time that you thought you might enlist into the armed services?
No. Well, I'll tell you what happened once, but really not. A former student of mine, who was in the Navy, and I think by that time he had a pretty high rank. He was very bright, probably rose very rapidly, and he wrote me a letter. He said, "Look, maybe you're still of age. Instead of being drafted, maybe you ought to volunteer. And you ought to volunteer into the Navy. I'll try to help you. Maybe it would be better," he said, "I know your attitude towards war." He was away some bit, but he wrote me the letter. So I thought to myself, all right, what harm can there be? I'll go. So I go to the recruiting, and I tell them the story. I tell them the truth. A student of mine wrote me in. So, I said, "How old are you?" "Yeah. What's your background?" I tell them the background. I said, "How about Japanese?" I said, "No, Japanese, no. But we'd have to." I said, "No, that's where I draw the line. I am willing to volunteer to fight against Hitler, to fight against the Japanese, who are not yet, I don't know yet." that was it. No, not really.
So then a few years later, you were...
I was drafted.
Okay. So tell me now about
I can give you the exact date.
I believe it was
1943. I'll give you the exact date. And by God, and this. Oh, I think we better rush it up, please. My wife won't know what happened to me. I was drafted December 25, 43, the day of Christmas, the day before Christmas.
Okay.
Or it is Christmas.
Tell me about your entrance into the Army. Where did you report?
I reported to what do you call it, to the Grand Central on Lexington Avenue, and I was taken from there to a train and taken to Fort Dix. No, not Fort Dix. Fort Dix. Fort Dix. That's right, Fort Dix.
What were you instructed to bring with you, and what did you choose to bring with you when you were leaving home to go into the service?
I was instructed to bring with me just personals, so I took a shaving set and and a cake of soap and shaving cream and a couple of pieces of underwear, and I think I took a pair of pajamas. I'm not sure. I think that's all I had with me in a little thing, but I also took, so I wanted something to read, so I took a Bible with me. I took a pocket book Bible. It's a full Bible.
We'll show it more clearly
all right.
at the end.
Yes, okay.
So you took your Bible with you. Tell me, when you were inducted into the Army, did you have a religious indication on your dog tag or on
Oh, yes.
your papers?
H. They did. They asked me whether I was Jewish. I said Jewish, and they put an H on.
Where were you trained and what type of training?
I was trained in Camp Edison, remember, which is right near Fort Dix. And what type of training? I was supposed to be in Signal Corps. So they gave me some sort of, but they had the regular introductory training with all the Chazarai.
Were there other Jewish GIs in your unit?
Oh yes, quite a few, quite a few.
Did you organize or attend any Jewish services on Shabbat or any other holidays that might have been at that time?
There were services. I didn't organize them, but there were services. There was a chaplain. And those of us who want to go were free to go. And later on, I became a chaplain's assistant. So then I organized services.
And where was that?
That was in Fort Dix, later.
Did you notice any anti-Semitism in the Army, in the armed services?
I can't say I did. I don't know. I personally was not affected by it in any way. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel that I was being, I don't know, in any way chosen for any particular thing. No, I didn't feel it.
So describe
And
to me...
and I didn't see in others, among others. But there were Jewish men in my unit. I remember one Perlmutter, a big, tall fellow, got back. I remember another one, not many, but there were a few.
Okay. So describe to me your military service and when and where you were shipped out.
Oh, all right.
And what your duties were.
Well, the only military service that I can have in the United States, I was supposed, according to my training, and because of my linguistics, they wanted to train me. I was assigned to the Signal Corps, and they started giving me courses in cryptography. But then one day, just a couple of weeks later, I was called to the personnel office. I came to the personnel office. The sergeant in charge. He said, "Sit down, please." I sat down. I asked him, what's up? He said, "Are you interested in cryptography?" I said, "Yes, I am. I think it's very good, and I think maybe I'll be good at it. Although I'm not much at puzzling, it's a little too much with puzzles, but nevertheless, I think it's my linguistic training would help me. So if you feel that it's important, I'll do it. I have no objections." He said, "Yeah, but we may have some objections." I say, "Why?" He said, "Your mother, is she a citizen?" I said, "No, my mother's not a citizen. My father's a citizen, but not my mother." He said, "Can't cryptography." So then what shall I do?
What was their concern?
Because cryptography deals with codes. And if it deals with codes, I'm going to reveal the secret to my mother, and my mother will go to the Germans and reveal the secrets to the Germans. And it's absolutely insane, ridiculous. But I wasn't going to fight with a regulation, an army regulation. So I say, well, then what shall I do? What do you suggest do? He said, "You're a teacher." I said, "Yeah, all right. How about teaching?" He said, "Fine, I'll teach." "Well, what do you want me to teach?" "Teach earth science." I said, "Earth science? I'm not a scientist." He said, "Well, but you can teach compass and so on." I said, "Yeah, these things I can, if you give me a manual, I can start teaching." I said, "All right, so we'll assign you to that." So they assigned me to that for a couple of weeks, and I began to that. But then the chaplain, whose name was Dunavitz, I think, decided that they needed a chaplain's assistant. So he asked, I might imagine the commanding officer, whoever it was, for a chaplain's assistant. So when I heard that, I went back to the sergeant I said, you know something? I think I have a better place for me and make you happier also. He said, yes, what? He said, I hear that there's an opening for a chaplain's assistant. I think the chaplain will be happy to have me, and if you're happy, I'll be happy. We said, oh, that's a good idea. So he called the chaplain. Well, I don't know how it happened, but 2 days later I became a chaplain's assistant, and I was very happy, and he was very happy because I certainly knew how to conduct service, and I know how to arrange a service, and I'm a pretty nice guy, and I know how to explain a service maybe better than he or something like that. So I was very happy because I had it. It was wonderful, and he was very happy.
Was this here? Was that stateside?
It was in Fort Dix, which was very good for me. Wonderful. I used to come home. I was finished with the service on Saturday, and then I'd take a ride to come home because Sunday I was free, and I'd come back Sunday night and report back and do my job as chaplain assistant, stay in the office, answer the phone, and so on and so on, arrange the service for the next week, and it was very good. And one day when I was home in October 1944, I was inducted in 43. No, October 1943, I'm sorry, 1943.
You said you were inducted December 20, Christmas 1943 is what you...
Yes, so this was in 44.
Right,
44,
3 months later.
that's right. That's October 1944. I get a phone call from the chaplain. He says to me, I'm sorry. All right, I'll move.
Continue.
He says, I have orders for you. So I said, what do you mean I have you orders? You have to report to Washington on Monday or whenever it was, Tuesday next day. You know, he gave me a few days. And see a certain major. Said, I don't know what it's all about, but I can't. Do you want me to do about it? I said, yes, if you want me as chaplain. If you want me as a chaplain, unless you're... He said, no, please. I'll speak to... I didn't want to do it because I thought maybe you knew something about it. I said, no. Oh, I think he thought that because the OSS was interested in me at one time, and the OSS asked for me, but then they decided against it. And I wasn't too anxious to go to the OSS anyway. So he said, all right, I'll try. So he went to see the commanding officer, whomever he went to see, and he called back again and said, can't do anything at all. These are high orders, and you must follow. So I reported to Washington. And I was in Washington for about a week, doing nothing, just reporting to this major. I went to a number of chamber music concerts at the Library of Congress. It was wonderful. I went to museums and went to sleep in one of the barracks in a nearby camp. I forget where they sent me there. And then finally, I was told to prepare for shipment. And they put me on a plane. I was the only enlisted man on the plane.
And what kind of unit was it?
This is what I want to tell you. No unit. The only enlisted men on the plane. All the others were majors and up. And we came to England. I don't want to go to the great details. Came to England. I had to report to another major in London. I reported to him for about a week. And then I was sent to Paris. And I reported there for about a week, and saw Huis Clos. No Exit by Sartre. It had just opened. It was a marvelous play. Saw it in French, of course.
What were the conditions?
Paris was already liberated. It was wonderful to be in Paris. There were lights on. London was impossible, and London was dangerous. Paris was no longer in danger. It was finished. I walked around freely. I went to the museums. It was wonderful. But I didn't know what it was all about. Nobody knew what it was all about. Then I was sent back to England. And this time I was sent to Repel Depot, to a replacement depot, which is a very dangerous place to be in, because you don't belong to anybody, and they can just pull you out and put you anywhere. I couldn't understand it. Now I must go back to the history, to snafu, typical Army snafu and State Department snafu. What happened was this. The unit they were finally looking for me, for just from there. I just want to know the exact name of the unit, because I always forget. U.S. Group Control Council for Germany. U.S. Group Control Council for Germany. I always forget it because it's a crazy name. What was it? Supposedly, the Soviet Union, France, and England decided to have a control council for Germany, what to do with Germany after the war. The only snafu was that the Soviet Union never agreed to it. And that's why that unit couldn't be activated. So they didn't know that that unit existed. They didn't know what to do with people who were sent specifically to be for that unit. Why did they send me to that unit? They saw by languages. They needed Russian translators and they needed Russian interpreters. So they sent me there. But the unit wasn't activated. It was nowhere under any paper. Didn't know what to do with me. Until I came to this replacement depot. And that was one hell of a place to be. Fortunately, again, it's only because I was older and more experienced, and I already knew the ways of the armies. I went to the personnel department and saw a sergeant there, and I told him, "Look, what are they doing with me? What is going on?" He said, "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know." I said, "If that's the case, please, give me a job." So what do you mean? I said, "Look, I can do this, I can do that." Who are you? I told him. I say, "Where do you come from?" He says, "I come from Albany." I said, "Albany? Oh, do you know this, you know that?" So we had a long talk about Albany, because I had worked in Albany and I knew the town. So he became quite interested in me, because I really knew Albany, his hometown. And I was there God knows when, but I was there. So he said, "All right, look, I'll give you a job in the office. You work in the office. And we'll see, maybe finally something will come through." And then finally, something did come through. They attached me to this unit. So I was taken out and assigned to this unit. And I was assigned to essentially, to the education department, because they wanted me to make plans what to do with the secondary schools in Germany after its defeat, to reconstruct, which made sense. I had some experience in secondary school. I was a teacher in a secondary school. I had my education courses in a secondary school, and so on. So that made sense. But then, when I finally came to Frankfurt, they needed somebody who knew Jewish things. So this education department became education and religion, because of Knappen. Colonel Knappen was an ordained minister. He was a Rhodes Scholar, he was a historian, but he was also an ordained minister.
And was he your commanding officer?
And he was my commanding officer.
In this control?
In this control council. He was in my charge. And he is the one who gave me orders what to do, what not to do. Excuse me. There's no basket here. All right. Now, so what do I do? In the meantime, I was collecting material. I was trying to get everything I can possibly get about secondary schools in Germany, written in German or in any other language that I can read, French, whatever it is. English I can certainly read. And whatever I was able to read, at least so I would have some sort of inkling. So I would know how to proceed when we finally come to Germany. So that was essentially my job. I was doing that. But then when we came to Frankfurt, and this happened.
Now, at what stage was the war when you got to Frankfurt? What was going on there?
The war was over.
Okay, so by the time you got there,
Yes.
the war was over. Okay.
The war was over. No, the war was over at that time, sure. The war was over, so we had to start really doing the things. So I had to start interviewing people and so on, seeing what the schools are, which schools still exist,
Who
don't
did
exist.
you interview?
Hmm?
Who, you said you had to interview people. Who were you interviewing?
Well, I was supposed to interview schoolmasters, but here's what happened in the meantime. In the meantime, almost at the very beginning, one day, a Captain Bookman comes in to see Knappen, my commanding officer, and tells him, look, you're in charge of the Education and Religion section of the Control Council. I have a problem. He said, what's your problem? He said, a chaplain came to see me and brought me this book. And the chaplain said that one of the GIs gave him this book, that he found it in some sub-cellar, and he gave him the address. What is it? Can you see what it is? So Knappen looked at the book and said, no, I don't know what it is, but I think I have someone who'll do it. And they called me, and it was a Mishnah, part of the Mishnah, post-biblical literature, part of the Talmud. So I told them, look, it's an important book. Where does it come from? To go look, there's no name, just say where. Found. So Bookman says, well, this is a big job. I'll need someone who really knows these things. So Knappen says, well, I really have only one man who can help you. I'll talk to him. And see. So he talked to me. I say, what? Tell me what? He says, on Bockenheimer Landstrasse. I say, what? Say that address again. So he says, on Bockenheimer Land. I said, Bockenheimer. Do you know what that is? He said, no, I don't know. I said, that was one of the offices of Rosenberg's institute. He said, what institute? He didn't know. So I tell him the following story. And this is, very few people know it. We all know that at the beginning, the Nazis would collect books and burn them publicly. That was in all the newspapers, and we all knew that. In the United States and other countries, I am sure. But then they stopped doing it. Why did they stop doing it? There were two important leaders of the Nazi Party outside of Hitler. There was the Rosenberg, the cultural minister, Goebbels, the propaganda minister, and then there was the Himmler. Himmler was the killing minister. Destructive. Himmler wanted to destroy everything. No signs left. So Himmler was burning the books. And Rosenberg established an Institut zur Erforschung der Judenfrage.
Translate.
An institute into research of the Jewish problem. Now, why did he do it? Because, and I don't know how many people know this, because Rosenberg's idea was they had no hesitation that they would win the war. If they won the war, then they'll control all Europe. All Europe means all German. Everything will be German. Therefore, everything will happen. So you don't need a Vienna University, you don't need a Berlin University, you don't need a Königsberg University, you don't need a Gießen University, and so on. Yes, you need them, but for special purposes. Vienna will become the medical school of the entire world. Berlin, philosophy. And so on and so on and so on. And Frankfurt will become the place where everything about the filthy Jews will be studied and researched. And therefore, every book, every item that has to do with Jewish life must be saved, because we need it, otherwise we cannot do it. So there was a big fight once between Himmler and Rosenberg in Hitler's office. And Hitler finally turned to Himmler and said, look, you have enough of a job. Nobody's stopping you. You do what you do. Let Rosenberg have his. No more burning books. Everything will be collected. Everything will be saved. That's the way it started. So books began to be shifted. To show you what they worked, let me tell you just one little story. In Amsterdam, there was people who knew Jewish bibliography, knew that there was a crazy guy whose name was Rosenthal. He was a doctor, a Russian Jew, who managed to escape from Tsarist Russia, somehow got a medical degree, came, settled in Amsterdam, made a lot of money in Amsterdam as a doctor, was a very good known doctor, made money somewhere else somehow, began to collect books, began to collect incunabulae. Incunabulae books are published before 1113 or something, I forget the date. And he left it all to the Amsterdam Library. It was called the Rosenthaliana Collection. One of the first things that the Nazis did when they came to Amsterdam is ask the university to give them the lab. And it was sent to Frankfurt. And such other things. So these things began to come, part to Prague and part to Frankfurt, because Prague was also a Jewish city, I mean the Jewish community, and Frankfurt. And that's how these things. So when this one soldier found this in the Bockenheimer Landstrasse, I knew that the Bockenheimer Landstrasse was one of Rosenberg's addresses, one of his office's place.
How did you know? How had you heard this whole?
I came across it in my readings about how the Nazi thing governed my research. So I said, we must go there now and see what's there. So we went to Bockenheimer Landstrasse and found, I don't know, not many, 1,000 crates and so on. Look, if we had the time, I tell you some of the things I immediately found, something that, and then we found it's impossible that this is the only thing that's left. This was the library. This was supposed to be a library. So we began to look for the chief librarian, whose name was Powell, like the chief, the fellow who lost in Stalingrad, same name. Couldn't find him. He finally wound up he ran away. Finally wound up in Argentina. But anyway, we found a couple of women who worked in the office. And I didn't do the interviewing. Some people from the other department did the interviewing of these women, found out what happened to all the others. They weren't all sent here. Where were the others sent? When the bombardment started in Frankfurt, we were afraid that they would be bombarded, and we wanted to save them. So we found an empty brick manufacturing, a tremendous place, brick manufacturing depot in Hungen, which is about 100 kilometers from here, and nobody would touch Hungen. It's a little bit of a town, and it's near Gießen. It's not a town, so no bombardment come there, and we shipped everything there. Yeah, how much? 39 carloads. 39 carloads of all kinds of relics, books, Taliesim, you saw. So Bookman and I, since he said, Bookman, you're in charge. You take it. It's your department. Bookman was in charge of arts and something. Yeah. Don't know what happened to him. He was in touch with me for many years and then he disappeared. I don't know. So we went.
What was your job?
My job was to see what's there, to organize, find a place for them, to get them out of there, to find a place. So we found a tremendous abandoned factory in Offenbach, which is right across the river from the mine. Frankfurt is on the river Main, M-A-I-N. And right across Main, there's a little town called Offenbach, and it was a manufacturing town, leather manufacturing, I think, mostly. And we found this tremendous, because you need a lot of space. And I said the only thing to do is at least to get some sort of sense of what we have here. I can just pry open a case and put my hand in and take something out. If we get there, we'll start building shelves and be able to do things little by little. And that's what we did. So Bookman and I had to run around, look for a place. We found that place. We began to organize train loads from Hungen to bring it to Offenbach. And it was beginning to look like it. For example, one day I came in, that they were passing out all papers. I came up with an invitation. I don't know whether you know what Ludwig Lewisohn was. Ludwig Lewisohn in the 20s and in the 30s was considered the American literary critic. He wrote for The Nation, he wrote for many other American literature critic. And then he became a professor. And he also wrote novels about Jewish topics, one of the very few. And he also became later a professor at Brandeis. An invitation to a bar mitzvah of Ludwig Lewisohn. I didn't know what town it came from. I knew he was German. I didn't know what town it came from. Things like that. Fantastic, absolutely. So that's what we did. And that was my job. That was my job. And I was continuing with it until I said, look, it's not for me. You need a bibliographer. You need a librarian. I never studied librarianship. I'm not a librarian. I am not a bibliographer. I'm pretty good for a substitute, because when I read something, I know what I read. I can read Hebrew, and I can read Yiddish, and I can read Spanish, and I can read Russian and Ukrainian, so I can tell you what's there. But we can't do it. We need, it'll take years, and it did. It'll take years to do it. And that's why Nappen was at a loss when I said, look, I want to go home. No wonder that they was at a loss, but I said, you have to, at least you have someone to guide you and do it. So they got finally Rifkind, and they organized it. And you see, as soon as I came back, I went to see a very famous woman, Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt was at that time working for the American Jewish Congress. So I thought I'll go to see her. She was a very strange woman, a very difficult woman. But anyway, I went to say it. I wanted to tell her. So she listened, she understood, she knew what it was. I said, look, the only thing I can do is to try to organize a committee right now. And she got in touch with Baron, which made sense. Baron was the historian at Columbia, and a great historian. And they organized the committee, what to do, and little by little, a lot of these Sifrei Torah were brought here, and a lot of I was in the synagogue recently where was I in the synagogue recently? For a bat mitzvah, somewhere in Long Island, and I see a Sefer Torah. I say one of these Sifrei Torah they got one of those Sifrei Torah.
What happened to the rest of the collection of books and other...
Wherever possible, I'll tell you just briefly.
Okay.
Briefly. Wherever possible, it was returned to the proper owners, where ownership could be established, like the Rosentaliana. Or another one that I can mention, that I know. Is it all right? There's a famous Jewish family in Italy, the Luzzatu family, dating back to God knows when. One was a prime minister, one was a Kabbalist, one was a very fine biblical scholar, one was a poet. The biblical scholar was also a book collector. His name was Shmuel David Luzzatu. Now this Luzzatu collected books all his life, and it was known as the Luzzatu collection. But he was an impoverished man. His last penny was spent on books. So finally he had to sell his collection. He had a marvelous collection. And the Alliance Israélite in France, that had money, bought his collection for their archives. So it became their ownership. In this hoard, that's what I call it, I suppose, in this piles of all these things, I found the Alliance Israélite collection of the Luzzatu collection. These are priceless books, priceless. They're incunabula, priceless. So there it was returned where it was possible. We found the Yivor, part of the Yivor library. Part of the Yivor library was returned to New York years later, but it was returned. Wherever no ownership, it was distributed among libraries in the United States. Some, the JTS got some, the Library of Congress got some, the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati and New York got some. The Sifrei Torah were also distributed to various congregations. That's all I can tell you. That's all I know.
In our earlier conversation, you also mentioned that when the war ended, you were instrumental in arranging for some Frankfurt citizens to return home, and I'd like you to tell me about that as well.
You know, I forgot their name. I'm ashamed of myself. I have to call someone.
But just tell me briefly.
I'll tell you what happened. One of the young boys in our unit, he was an MP. He worked as an MP. But he was a Jewish boy from Berlin. And he came to me in Frankfurt. That happened in Frankfurt. Look, I know that you will eventually get to Berlin. I don't know what will happen to me. Because he knew what I was doing. When you come to Berlin, see if you can find any of my relatives. And he gave me a list. So I came to Berlin. I began to look around. And I found he wanted to find an uncle. I didn't find the uncle. But I found a man and wife who were distant cousins. they somehow remained alive in Berlin. He was a very sick man. He had a very bad ulcer and needed special food. So when I found him and located him, I began to try to get special food for him as much as I could from our own commissary. And what I couldn't, I wrote to Celia, and at that time they used Nestle chocolate. So she used to airmail Nestle chocolate to me, and I'd give it to him. Then one day, when I was already getting ready to go home, I wanted to say goodbye to them. I didn't want to leave without trace. So I went there. By this time they had some living quarters again. And I came to them to say goodbye to them. And they wanted to give me a pair of candlesticks, Sabbath candlesticks. Very beautiful, Polish. I recognized they were Polish made. And I refused to take them. I said, no, you don't take them. There'll be Jewish. He said, no, there'll be no Jewish life in Germany, so you have them. I say, no, it's not true, because as a matter of fact, I just found a rabbi in Wiesbaden to establish the community there, which I did, which I really did. So he said, no, we want you to have it. Well, I refused to take them. But they knew where I was working. And the next day when I came into the office, I found these two candlesticks. So of course I couldn't do any more. I packed them up and mailed them home. And I kept in touch with them when I came back, and finally they came to the United States. They came to the United States. He became a sexton, a shamash, in a synagogue in Hartford, Connecticut. And we used to see each other occasionally, because I had a former student who was a rabbi in Hartford. I would go to see him, and they would come to see me. But I forgot their name now. I'm terribly sorry. Okay. But I kept in touch with them. And the candlesticks are with me. They insisted that I keep them, and for which I am very grateful.
We're going to stop here to change tape.
Yes.
We continue with tape 2 with Mr. Abraham Aroni. Mr. Aroni, you were discussing the work that you did with the books and artifacts that you found, and you had just told the story of this couple whom you had helped. Please continue about your work after the war, and what was the end of this project for you? When did you finish?
Let's see. I continued with this work until about November 15th, 1945. And then I just wanted to go home. I was tired, and I really felt that it requires specialists. It required a good bibliographer. It required good librarians, good archivists, because there was so much and it was so varied that it couldn't be left to a person who cannot really do it justice. And I know that it continued later on with some experienced librarians and archivists, and certain treasures were returned to the owners wherever ownership was established, properly established and correctly established, and others were distributed to various libraries and institutions, in various countries. Certainly, the YIVO books, wherever possible, were returned to YIVO in New York. The Rosentaliana, I was told, was returned to Amsterdam. The Alliance Israélite collection was returned to the Alliance Israélite in France, and so on and so on. I remember there was talk something about the Breslau, the Breslau Rabbiner Institute, whose library we found there, or part of it, what to do with it, because Breslau became Bratslav, and it became part of the communist part of Germany. And I don't know what happened to that and what they decided. That's not, I don't know, but probably the people who were in charge, Rifkind may have known, or others, I don't know. And now,
did you have any contact with Holocaust survivors, with concentration camp survivors? Did you come across anybody who could tell you about what happened there?
No, not while I was in Germany. I only remember that, well, I know two things. One is that because Frankfurt had such a large Jewish community, we felt that the people of the council, Colonel Knappen and others and I, felt that some of the Jews may have been saved, rescued somewhere. And we managed to get together. I don't know exactly how it was done, because I think mostly it was done with Colonel Knappen, but I know I did it. It was done, and I know the result of it. We sent off some trucks, managed to get trucks to send them off to Theresienstadt. And there were some Frankfurt Jews among the living, and they were brought back to Frankfurt, among them a rabbi, whose name was either Neustadt or Neiman, I don't remember. I only remember that he came back and that I went to see him and introduced myself, and that he had a volume of Bialik, the small sort of pocket volume of Bialik's poetry, and he said that it kept him alive, and it kept him sane while he was there. Actually, that was about the only thing we had, and the other, which was really not exactly direct contact. We heard that some Jews had returned to Wiesbaden, and because they had returned, we did go back there. I remember Captain Bookman and I went back there, and we found that the synagogue was still usable, and it was. And then we located a man with a rabbinical, who said he had a rabbinical degree, and he said he would take care of the synagogue and the community. There were some returned at that time, which was probably, let me see if I can remember when it was. It must have been in September of 1945, either August or September of 1945. I was told that there were about enough for a minyan, about 10, 12 Jews that had returned. And so the synagogue was revived, and some sort of Jewish community life was revived in that community in Wiesbaden. But that is the only one that I am aware of. In Berlin, as far as I know, by the time I left in November, there was no sign of Jewish life.
What was it like for you in Wiesbaden to see the reestablishment of a Jewish community after the annihilation?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I wasn't there.
Oh.
As a soldier, I just couldn't just get into a car and go there. It wasn't my job. My job was to try to reestablish it and leave it there. I suppose if I had made a special effort, I suppose I could have done it. And now I am sorry that I didn't do it, but I did not do it. But I know but I know it was done. So that in itself makes me happy. And it makes me also quite happy the fact that the the United States Army realized the importance of reestablishing some sort of Jewish life, Jewish community life, and that they even. I know that Colonel Knappen wanted to get me a Bronze Star for my help with that, and he was turned down. But at least the Army wrote on my official discharge some sort of commendation for reestablishing Jewish community life in the United States sector, because I had nothing to do with the English sector or with the British, or with the, that's right, with the British sector or the Russian sector. I had nothing to do with it.
What was your impression of what had happened at the end of the war when people did start to trickle back? Did you have enough contact to have any feeling of the enormity of what had happened?
Yes, I think I did. I'm an art lover, and as soon as there was some semblance of artistic life in Berlin while I was there, I tried to find it. And I found one gallery with a certain young German woman, Ilse Vogel, V-O-G-E-L, who later came to the United States, got married. She was an artist herself and a writer, wrote children's books. And I found from our intelligence service that while she was pro-Allies, not that she has done anything, but she certainly was not a Nazi. And she told me of her suffering during the war, of the famine, and the general
Was she Jewish?
population. She was not Jewish. She was not Jewish. She said she would have tried to help Jews, but it was almost impossible for her to do anything. At least that's what she said. Whether it really was possible or not, I don't know. But she was not officially a Berliner. She was born somewhere, I forget where, in Germany, and was alone there, not with parents. A lonely woman. She was not married at the time. I think she was quite young when I met her, probably in her 30s or something like that. That was my contact with her. Otherwise, I had very little contact with the people, except with the truckers when they left to Theresienstadt, and when they came back, I was there to thank them for doing it, and that's about all. Because really, it was not my work to do that sort of thing. And as I say, in Berlin, the only two Jews that I found were this couple, whose name I forget, and who later came to this country, to the United States. And in Frankfurt, I did speak to the rabbi who came back, and he told me of the number of the few others came. And that's about all, I think.
Okay. When were you discharged and when did you return home?
I was discharged on November 23rd. November 23rd, 1945, and I came home, I think the same evening. I believe so. I took the train and went directly home. And the following Monday I went to work. Went back.
You had been married before the war. How did your experiences affect your marriage and how that separation?
It was very hard. Very, very difficult. I think Celia she still has the whole batch of email that she received from me. And I know that I have the whole batch of letters she wrote me. I wrote her every day. Fortunately, I was able to do it. I was not at the battlefront. Never was. So I was able to do it. No matter how short it was, it may have been only 2, 3, 4 lines, but I was able to do it and write it. I always wrote it in Hebrew, and I did it purposely, because you had to signify on the envelope what language it was, because very frequently they censored the mail, and they wanted to know. And I wanted to have Hebrew place in it, and let some Hebrew guy have the pleasure of reading good Hebrew, because my Hebrew is good. So I know that, but it was very difficult. Also, it was more difficult for Celia than for me. I had a job to do. She worked, that's true, but she was lonely. And she is not the kind of woman who can go into a restaurant by herself. Not the type of woman who can go into a movie by herself. She's just not that person. I don't say it's bad or good, but I tried to convince her to act differently. I haven't succeeded in 66 years of marriage. So it was extremely difficult for her. Nevertheless, not only did she write regularly, but she sent me food regularly. I'm still amazed, absolutely amazed. She used to send me fresh apples, and they came because we didn't have any fresh fruit, and she knows how much I live on fresh fruit. And she sent me pickled lox, and we used to have some people in my unit, 2, 3 people together. That was a holiday when the packages came, and they came quite frequently. And I must tell one crazy story. The first package that she mailed, I never received, and I couldn't understand why I haven't received it. It came 2 months after I came back to the United States. But it finally found me, So that was what it was like. It was very, very hard on her, extremely hard on her.
Did you have any children?
No.
Okay. So you said you went back to work the next Monday morning
The
teaching?
next Monday morning teaching at Thomas Jefferson High School.
Okay, and how long did your teaching career continue?
At Thomas Jefferson, I was in Thomas Jefferson High School for 18 years. And then again, teaching French and Hebrew at Jamaica High School for 15 years. No, about 12 years. And then at the same time at the New School for Social Research, special courses and Hebrew. Had interesting experiences there too.
Okay. Do you think that your experiences in World War II changed you or affected the rest of your life?
That's a very good question. perhaps changed me only in one way. As a Jew and as a person well read in Hebrew literature in the original languages, Hebrew, Yiddish, Aramaic, I always felt the great unity of the Jewish people. But I think it became even stronger after my experiences in the war. Especially when I saw some of the, I had no direct contact with them, but I saw them in Berlin and Frankfurt. They came back little by little and I would see them. Especially when I saw some of the people who came back from the concentration camps alive and what they looked like and what they had to live through. I didn't talk to them directly, I don't know. But I knew from reading and from hearing. I felt a tighter my tighter belonging to this group, and my feeling that it's a sort of miraculous thing, I don't know, for us to exist alive and so on. Just as I am still amazed how my own family, 7 children and my mother, lived through the First World War in Ukraine, managed to come to the United States, whole, healthy, 7 children and a lone woman, and managed to have a good life in this country, settled. My sisters were settled. My 2 brothers who are still alive are all right. My one sister who is still alive, she's 95, she's still all right. Still has a memory. For all these, I am grateful no end, and I consider it miraculous, just as I consider learning of a language miraculous, or language itself miraculous. I feel that way. And so, generally speaking, I'm a quite well-adjusted human being, even at my age.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a one-volume Bible given to me by 2 of my colleagues the day I was leaving for the army. The 2 colleagues are Rabbi Lewitis and Eddie Horowitz.
Can you just describe the inscription?
The inscription says, to our dear friend Abraham Aroni, and on the day of his mobilization to the United States Army, Tzeitzcha l'shalom uvoacha l'shalom. May your leaving be in peace, and may your coming back be in peace. This is the castle in Hungen, near Gießen, which was the main office of the Institut zur Erforschung der Judenfrage of Rosenberg. And this was their office, in which there were some books, but this picture was an official picture by the Signal Corps of the United States, and probably, I think it was taken in May 1945. This is the brick factory in Hungen, near Gießen, which contained 39 carloads of all sorts of Judaica, books, prayer shawls, tefillin, phylacteries, sifrei Torah, scrolls of the Torah, various religious articles, personal photographs, personal letters, phonograph records, particularly liturgic music, a lot of liturgic music. And it was huge. It doesn't look huge here, but it was huge. If I can tell you, it took us 39 carloads to shift it back from Hungen to Offenbach am Main. Here are some of the things that we found inside that brick factory. These are tefillin, just thrown on top of each other, which are phylacteries, which the law-abiding or observant Jew puts one on his head and one on his left arm during prayer service on weekdays. And this picture also was taken by the Signal Corps of the United States, probably in May 1945. This also is a picture taken by the same group, by the Signal Corps of the United States, and this shows a prayer shawl, a talit, and they were just bunched up there in a container on top of each other. Again, it was inside this brick factory, and taken at the same time in May 1945. This too is inside the brick factory, and this looks like a case. I remember what it looked like, filled with religious relics. I see there is a spice box. I see a little menorah, a little candelabra for Hanukkah, and various other such items. I see a pointer, a Torah, not one, I see 3 or 4 Torah pointers, which is pointed during the reading of the Torah in the synagogues, taken by the same outfit, by the Signal Corps in May 1945 in Hungen, in that little town. Again, in the brick house, in that brick